this is the sevens, last but not least. And we have Garth and Kelly and Sandy and Charlotte. And Charlotte has recently had knee surgery, and so she's very kindly to be on the panel anyway, even though she has some knee discomfort. So she may need to stand up and walk around a little bit. So if that happens, just know that that's normal. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about 7, and then we'll open up to our experts. So type 7, the last type of the head triad. This is, again, part of the fear triad. However, most 7s usually say they don't really relate to feeling fearful. They tend to focus very much on the positive. They tend to be very optimistic and enthusiastic. And the only time they might resonate with fear is that sometimes 7s will say they do have a fear of being trapped in something unpleasant, being trapped in an emotional feeling that's like discomfort or anxiety or boredom even. And so they will tend to, especially unconsciously, move toward pleasure and positive things to think about and positive emotions and away from pain. Now, again, I have a sexual 7 friend who always reminds me to make sure to say that that's very unconscious. Most 7s, it's kind of a blind spot that they're actually moving away from something. It more just feels like they're just moving towards the looking at the bright side or seeing the silver lining, or just that they're seeing what's really out there that is very positive. But there is a fear of being that if they let in an uncomfortable emotion, if they go there a little bit, they'll be in it forever, and it'll be hard for them to get out. So that's more the fear that they sometimes relate to. 7s generally, they're mental types, and their mental ability is to really, they have a lot of flexibility mentally. They can skip from one idea to another very quickly. They have very quick minds. And they are very good at seeing connections between things that other people may see as dissimilar. But they find interesting connections between things. And so their minds are what's sometimes called synthesizing minds or monkey minds, in that they're moving from things very, very quickly to another thing very quickly. Another 7 friend of mine often says that they have bright, shiny object syndrome. So there's like a looking for the next bright, shiny object that's in their field of vision. The passion here is gluttony. And this is for a little bit of taste of everything that looks interesting or fun or feels good or is pleasurable. And the 3 subtypes are different in that they express a gluttony for 3 different kinds of experiences. Self-preservation 7s tend to be very practical. And they tend to be good at getting their needs met, sometimes through a network of friends and alliances. Naranjo says they're good at creating a good mafia where they can kind of get their needs met through people that they know and people that they're connected to. Self-preservation 7s are very pleasure-loving. They're very good at creating opportunities for themselves and just generally making things happen through kind of knowing how to manage things and making things happen through being practical and pragmatic. The sexual 7 is very opposite to that. They're more, instead of being more sort of practical, grounded in reality, they tend to be more idealistic, more imaginative. It's more like heavenly, things of the higher realm. And they're probably the most optimistic and see things almost so positively. It's like seeing the world through rose-colored glasses or through the optimism of someone who's in love. And it said love is blind. So sexual 7s can be a little bit suggestible, and suggestibility is the title, which means easy to hypnotize and sometimes a little bit naive about what's really happening because they're so focused on the most positive outcome or what's really good in whatever's happening. And they can live a little more in their imagination of what's good rather than in what's maybe really happening in the moment. And of course, going into the imagination is an unconscious way of moving into the future or into their positive visions of what could be, and an unconscious way of potentially avoiding what might be happening in the moment that doesn't feel so good or is a little bit more challenging. I would say the social 7 is different. Again, it's a very interesting type. Social 7s, it's as if they sense in gluttony a little bit of a tendency to want more for themselves or a self-interest and excessive self-interest, and they decide to go against it by being for other people. So a social 7 is a 7 that actually can look like a 2 because they tend to be very service-oriented and they tend to move toward jobs that are concerned with the alleviation of pain. So you find them as doctors and nurses and chaplains and hospice workers, people who almost have an ideal of service. And the word is sacrifice, and sacrificing their own self-interest for a higher ideal. So it's the person who wants to take the biggest piece of cake, but decides to take the smallest piece of cake so they can give the other cake to other people. So it's an interesting type. So I like to highlight it because sometimes it's the counter type, and sometimes the counter types aren't well known among people who maybe have just heard about the 9 types and don't know this approach to the subtypes. So other things to say about 7s. 7s sometimes report having a happy childhood, whether or not it actually was. And they often remember things a little bit more positively than it may have happened. But again, this is this is actually, I think, comes in handy a lot in work settings and in relationships, because I think there's a real strength in seeing what's positive in a situation or in a person, in highlighting the positive data. Now, of course, they can get in trouble when they avoid seeing the negative data, but there is something very positive and uplifting in that. 7s often want to keep the mood up and they want things to be better for everybody. And so there often is a very positive intention behind their positive thinking, and they tend to be very good at generating ideas and brainstorming and being visionaries and innovative, out-of-the-box thinkers. They also tend to be very futuristic or future-oriented and having clear visions of how something could be in the future. Okay, so let's leave it there, and we'll turn to the real experts to talk a little bit about type 7. So I'm wondering if it would be a good idea to start all the way over with you, Charlotte, just to allow you to talk in case you need to take care of your knee. But I'd love to hear how you relate to 7 and how you found yourself as a 7 and how you see this type playing out for you in your life.
Okay. Well, it's sort of interesting because I had done a number of Enneagram workshops, probably, I don't know, maybe in the 90s. And every time I went to one, I mean, it would be a full weekend, and I thought I was every one of the 9 types. It drove me crazy. I could just relate to everyone. I said, how can I possibly use this? Because I do work a lot with Myers-Briggs and do a lot of other instruments, and I do executive coaching and team building. And so I said, how can I possibly ever use this with a client when I don't know who I am? How can I possibly help somebody else know who they are? And then a mutual friend of ours suggested that I go to the Enneagram workshop, get certified in an instrument from South Africa. And I just rolled my eyes and I said, really, not another one, blah, blah. And I went, and it was fabulous. It was like the first time I got the report, I read this thing, and I think what really made me realize that I was a 7 was the part about fear and anxiety being the motivator. That was like, out of all of them, I thought, no, it's not anger, it's not the esteem one. No, it's definitely fear and anxiety. From the time I was a small child, I was just so fearful growing up. I really was. What I did with it is I went to spirituality from a very young age. I used to just pray every night. And my prayers were, don't let there be a fire in the home. Don't let there be a world war. Don't let there burglars come in. I mean, I had it covered with my prayers at night. I was just so filled with fear. So that was a part of me, but the other part of me was this whole imaginative world that I could create that I remember wanting a piano and creating a keyboard on the chest of drawers in my in my bedroom and playing for a long time, like playing piano on this little fake keyboard, so and having imaginary friends and just really being able to go outside with my friends and create these scenarios. We'd create plays, and I'd be busy all the time, and I'd be totally up in this other fantasy world that, when I realized now, was just what was really creating happiness for me, because there was some problems in my home with alcohol. And so it was a loving family, but a tough, really tough issues at home. So I think my imagination was just a great way of escaping this sort of tendency to be anxious and fearful, and real issues that I had in my home with particularly my father. So, yeah, I would say that was...
Yeah, you hear that from sevens. We'll talk about the way they coped with fear was to kind of escape into their imagination, where they can sort of create the experience they'd rather be having almost, or be with something more pleasant in their mind, as a way of coping with what wasn't so pleasant. And so then it becomes a habit. Yeah.
Right. And then I really saw it in my career. The whole thing, I mean, the words that come to mind that resonated for me when I did this instrument, the word possibility. I mean, I love the word. You just have to say possibility to me, and I'm your friend. Like, I'm going to go there with you. Possibility is just so cool for me. And fun. Fun. Whenever I'm doing a workshop, one of the goals I have on a flip chart is fun.
Making work fun is something
it has to be
sevens
fun.
do well, yes.
And I have a quick story about that, which is so funny, because I was an HR director in a bank for a while on Cape Cod. And when I left, I was there for 7 or 8 years. And I used to make our managers do these really fun team building things. I'd do training with them once a month and make them do all sorts of weird stuff. And when I left, they had hired a photographer to go up to the top of a balcony of the bank, and they made their bodies say F-U-N. And that was my going away present, was because that was what I always wanted us to have at work, was we had to have fun. If we didn't have fun, forget it. So, and then, changing jobs, and freedom was the third word. So possibilities, fun, freedom. And so don't fence me in. I mean, It's just, and I've been divorced for a number of years, and I think, that is an issue, I think, for me, is that I just don't want to be fenced in. It's, I don't have a problem with commitment, but I don't want to be fenced in.
Right.
So, so don't fence me in jobs either. And so I ended up going out on my own in the 90s and having my own consulting business, which I've had for almost 30 years. I mean, I call it semi-retired now, but pretty much on my way out. But for about 30 years. So just doing my own thing, being my own boss.
No limits, yes.
No, so really.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. That's really important, that sevens are very sensitive to their freedom being restricted by from the outside, and losing options.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very important that you highlight that. That's really clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Sandy, what does this look like for you? How did you come to 7, and how does that play out?
I started studying the Enneagram probably in the 90s as well. And I was reading Helen Palmer's book, her first book. And as I was going, similar to you, I was like, oh, I think I'm this. Oh, I think I'm that. Oh, I thought I was a 2 because I'm a giver in relationships. I thought I was a 4 because in relationships, I always was like the push-pull, trying to seek the unattainable. But when I landed at 7 and I read it, I was like embarrassed, thinking, oh my God, they're writing about me. I mean, it just hit me. And fear was something, I never thought I was a fearful person, never, until I started studying the Enneagram and realizing how fearful I was and how reframing everything, try to make everything positive. And anyway, that's kind of how I came about it.
And do you also relate to this part about not being limited from the outside?
Oh,
or-
yeah. Yeah, I don't like to be limited. I don't have so much an issue with commitment. I've been married 13 years, happily. But I don't like to be, like in my job, I like freedom. I like flexibility. Flexibility is really important to me. Flexibility, fun is key. The job I have now, that's one of the company's values is fun. So that worked out well. Yes. I'm trying to think of what else.
And by the way, I think it's a myth that sevens can't commit. I think that's a
Yeah.
real misconception because
Yeah.
I find that most sevens I know, I mean, they may be really thoughtful before they commit to something, like they make sure, but once they commit, like several of my good seven friends are been married a long time, very committed, commit to jobs. I mean, I think that's a myth. So I'm glad that you both kind of said you don't have a problem committing because
Yeah.
I kind of want to highlight that as something that I think is a stereotype of sevens and not necessarily really true.
One of my challenges is, as you mentioned earlier, is hanging out with those emotions that are challenging, like sadness or, really challenging times. And that's been, or a friend who has a problem and they continue to have this problem. They continue to have, and I'm there and I want to help and I want to be supportive. And then nothing changes. And then I get frustrated and then I'm tired of that. It's like, move on already. You know what I mean? And I try to be, not so judgmental about it, but
What do you think it is about those feelings or emotional experiences that's hard for a seven or for you?
well, one, I used to say the same thing, like fear of going there is the abyss. I'll never get
abyss.
out. To either let myself go there, to feel, if I felt everything that I truly felt, like I can cry at a commercial, a stupid commercial, that I'll start crying about all the ills of the world. And so I don't want to let myself get there. I don't know.
So it does feel like it would be never ending.
It feels like it'd be never ending. And yet when I do have those moments when I can let my guard down and really get into my feelings and have a good cry, it's really refreshing and it's cleansing and it kind of lifts a weight up,
Yes.
but it's so hard to get there.
Yes. And sometimes life takes us there, right? I mean, things happen. And I find that just like, I think it's unfortunate that people will say if you're a four, if you're happy, you can't be a four. It's similar for seven. I think some sevens have gone through some tough stuff, and it doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means their sort of first level response can be like just sort of reframing or something like that.
Right. And I've had friends who have, challenged me when they've gone through hard times, feeling like I wasn't there for them, and that's been hard for me to hear and pay attention to that, and hopefully a lesson for me for going forward to be better at that.
Right. And can you give us an example of reframing? Because I think it's both a seven gift, but it can also be a problem. Can you give us an example of how that might happen or how you've done that?
I do it. I do it a lot. But a specific example. I can't think of a specific, but it's
That maybe something about how it happens.
generally like if it's a negative thing, I want to think the best case scenario. Well, I'm thinking about something that's going on right now on TV. I don't know if you all heard about Jesse Smollett.
Yeah.
So I watch Empire. I love his character on the show. And when this thing first happened to him, I was like, felt so bad for him, like all this stuff. And now the twist that's going around, like I don't want to believe it. I want to keep thinking no.
You want to keep thinking
I want to keep
positively
thinking
about
positive
him.
that he didn't create that. So that's kind of maybe that's
Well, I think it's
connecting the
I think it's
dots.
actually a good example because I think a lot of sevens do that with the people in their lives. Like my friend who's a sexual 7 says that sometimes her friends will say to her, look, I'm not as awesome as you think I am. That there's a real,
Yeah.
but again, I think it
Yeah.
can be a beautiful trait of a
Yeah.
7 of like really seeing the good in us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was talking about that with a friend at work, a coworker, and she's like, he's crazy. I'm like, I wanted to defend him. Maybe he is, but
Right.
anyway. So yeah, and then the flip side of that is not seeing the reality, and so always making everything positive. Well, everything is not positive, What is true, what is real. So
Okay. Thank you.
welcome.
So Kelly, how did you discover you were a 7 and how does this play out for you?
I dated this guy years ago, and I didn't know anything about the Enneagram at the time, and he just looked at me one day and he goes, "You're a 7." And I'm like, "What is a 7?" And I did just kind of set it aside, and I didn't think much about it for years and years and years. And then I became a Myers-Briggs junkie, and I studied that for a really long time, and I got really proficient at it, and I could type anybody, talking to them for half a minute, and I would know what they were. And so then I had a friend invite me to a woman locally who does a lot of Enneagram teaching to one of her panels. And I sat up there and I was listening to everybody and I was like, I love this stuff. This is like my new area of study and I want to start learning. So I joined a couple of her groups, and I've only been learning this for about a year and a half, so I'm fairly new to it. And when I heard the 7s on her panel talking, I knew clearly what this guy years ago said, "You're a 7," and I knew what he meant. And it's just, for me, even when I was really little, sort of like what you're saying about having this fantasy life, and same kind of thing. I had these like imaginary little friends, and I would get aggravated with my parents over something. And I remember my sister and I had these like imaginary friends, and we'd sit and talk to them, and we'd talk about our anger towards our parents, and we'd talk about all these things. But it was like our real little world that we could create that was a safe place for us to go. And then as I kept growing more and learning more, and now that I look back on different parts of my life, I see how jobs, like I can't tell you how many jobs I've had and how many roommates I've had and how many boyfriends I've had. And it's like there's always one that's better and there's always a job that's more fun. And when the person on the 5 panel that said that he didn't understand the definition of boring, I was like, really? And like, boring is such a profound word for me, because the minute I feel any sense of boredom, I'm like, oh, it's time to do something different. It's time to get a new job. It's time to get a new boyfriend. It's, and my current boyfriend is in this room right now, just so you know.
Unnoticed.
Right. He's a disguise. So and it's always this sense of adventure, it's always a sense of wanting to have more fun and do things that are more exciting. And like, for instance, we went on a trip around the country in an RV for 5 weeks over the summer. And, then we came back to reality, and I was like, within the next week, I was like, when is our next trip and where are we going and what's the next thing? And not really wanting to get back into the reality of my life, which is, you have to work and you have to, have a job and you have to do these things. And to me, it's just always been about so much fun. And then about 4 months ago, I hit a very interesting point in my life where I had, my back was completely out. And it's the first time in my life I've ever had physical pain. And I literally, for 2.5 months, was on my back and standing and on my back and standing, and I couldn't move and I couldn't walk. And I'm a big yoga teacher. I'm a yoga therapist, and I couldn't do anything with my body. And that was my way to get through everything. I would always escape through my hot yoga and my movement and my walking and running and hiking. And when I couldn't do this anymore and I was literally flat on my back, I was kicking and screaming and miserable and trying to be graceful, but I wasn't doing it very well. And then I started realizing the real value of going into those dark places and going into the pain and seeing what is behind the pain and where it comes from. And it's been a real teaching tool. It's only been a few weeks that I've actually been sitting in a chair. So it's really been humbling. And now that I can actually experience life again, I know that it's important for me to actually go to those places. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important for sevens when they can do that work. And it's very precious, that when they allow themselves. And it sounds like you learned through experience that it didn't last forever.
Right, but I thought it was going to last forever.
Yes.
And I put all those scenarios in my head, like, what if I never walk again? And what if I can only stand up? And what if I can't work? And what if I can't have fun? And what if I can't sit in the RV? And what if I can't go out to a restaurant? Or I can't go for, this was constant going on in my head. So yeah.
The real anxiety about the loss of freedom.
Totally.
And what if this is forever? And it's
Yeah.
interesting, my teaching partner, Uranio, says that actually sevens are the most pessimistic type because they think if they let this pain in, it'll last forever. And that's a real pessimistic point of view. And so I want to highlight again, it sounds like you had an experience that it didn't last forever. And so I think making sure that you notice that, and that sevens can kind of reassure themselves around, it won't last forever, even though I fear it will,
Yeah. And now I feel like I just want to I want to just do so many things now because I haven't been able to.
Right.
And so someone said, do you want to be on a panel? And I said, yes. I don't care if I can sit, but I'll go.
Yes. The possibilities are again open to you. Yeah. And do you do reframing? Like, do you naturally reframe negatives into positives?
Yeah. Especially like if a friend will call me up and tell me about like a hard day she's having, or she's doing I have this friend who's doing this remodel on her house right now, and she's doing a kitchen project. And every time she calls me up, she's telling me about, it's I had to go get the tile. The tile isn't the right color, and it's not matching the countertop. And finally, one day I said to her, I was like, you're having a brand new kitchen put in your place, or a brand new bathroom. Like, how exciting is this? I love the tile. It's so beautiful. And just trying to get her to look on the positive side of what she's experiencing as such a negative thing. So I think I do that often with people because it's like you were saying too, like when people start telling us all these negative things, and perhaps also there's a fear of not wanting to get into that negative space with them. And so wanting to speak positively so that they can get into a positive space so I don't go down with them.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I want to pull you out, but it's also about me.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you. So Garth, how have you recognized that you're a seven, and what does this look like for you? How do you relate to these patterns?
Yeah, I don't have probably as much experience with the Enneagram as many of you do, but I've been around it and conversations about it, and just sort of absorbed it through osmosis through so many friendships over the years. And I remember taking a test maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and I just instantly recognized myself. It wasn't anything like many of you have spoken about, gosh, am I this, am I that, am I this? It was very, very clear to me. I recognized my nature. When I was, one of the most probably influential experiences that I've had in my life happened when I was in the 5th grade. A student teacher came in to class, and she was with us for some time, and she had us for a week or so put our heads down on the desk, and she'd put on classical music and have us imagine just what comes into your mind when you listen to this music. And then afterwards we wrote. And this wonderful, extraordinary world opened up. I was already a reader, but now I didn't even have to have words. There was just the music, and my own imagination was off on these wonderful flights. And it was so tremendous that that years later, when I got into education myself in my early 20s, well, even before that, I started telling stories when I was in my maybe 17, 18 years old as a camp counselor, and saw how children responded to stories. And I realized how powerful story was for imagination. Then in my early 20s, I started making guided imagery recordings, CDs of teaching environmental education through, be a swan and go on a swan migration, feel the wind across your face and feel the wind in your feathers, and feel your feet touching down on the ice cold water, and the stars in the water. Just this huge imaginative world was enormous. So, and I did a lot of that, and I became a professional storyteller, actually. And for 10 years, I spent my life in the world of the imagination, which was vast. I routinely would lay down on a couch and be completely motionless for 2 hours and get an enormous amount of work done. I could walk through, all the different elements in my imagination, and my movements, my facial expressions, my voice, all the details of the story, all of that completely inwardly. So the imagination was really, really important to me. And another strong element of my nature from a very early age was this sort of mystical orientation. I was very attracted to ideas, and particularly idealistic ideas, expansive ideas. I think I was 12 when our Boy Scout troop went on this big hike, and we took the wrong trail. And it was my first big hike. I'd only been in the Scout for a few months, and back in those days there weren't light equipment, and so I had like 50 pounds on my 12-year-old back. And we ended up climbing up this huge mountain after going around in a circle. And by the time we got to the top, boys were just falling down, weeping, with the exhaustion. And I got to the top and I had a mountaintop experience. I just felt God everywhere. I looked out over the valleys and over the mountaintops, and there was God everywhere. And that became a touchstone for me. I looked for that, ever after that. So by the time I was in high school, I was reading Emerson. The whole idea of football games and proms, it was just like, no interest whatsoever, and very much expansive in my orientation. So by the time I was in my early 20s, I was a monk in a yoga community and meditating a lot. And the downside of it was I'm definitely not the practical subtypes of
The self-preservation.
So I was like
7.
50 before I decided to check how much money I had in my bank account.
Right. Yes.
So, the whole idea of career planning, financial planning, spreadsheets, just completely foreign to my nature. And I've had to force myself into that, in later years. Adventure, I've loved adventure. I was always in trees when I was a boy. And later on, I was in rivers, and I could swim in big currents, I didn't care if I got sucked into the water. It would let me up. It was 30 seconds, a minute, it would let me up. And I would just relish the feeling of being turned in the currents. I remember in Hawaii, I was in this, the 7 sacred pools on Maui. And I was down there washing back and forth with the tidal currents coming in and out, and people were screaming at me, "Get out of there! Get out of there! You're going to drown!" I said, "No, I'm having a wonderful time. This is fantastic." So that was very much my nature,
So even doing borderline dangerous things,
definitely
but
doing
seeing it
borderline
as a grand adventure in a positive light.
Right, and because it put me also in touch with what was beyond me. These big powers of nature, the wind and the water and the tides and all of that expansive kind of stuff was extremely,
Right.
comfortable to me.
And we just heard from the 6s, and one might experience those things and feel afraid, but it sounds like that wasn't your experience at all. It was this expanded consciousness, or this very positive experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about, have you ever experienced this sort of focus on the positive as a moving away from pain, or how has it been in your life when things have been difficult? Has it been, what's that been like? Has it been hard to navigate?
Well, I have to speak in the past tense there, because I do remember, when I was in my 20s, I didn't have much patience for the ordinary, and I didn't have patience for ordinary people. The idea of living in a house in a neighborhood was just ridiculous. And, I discounted people who did ordinary things. If you were an electrician or a gardener or a carpenter, I just completely discounted it because it didn't have any value.
Was there a sense that it was boring, a little bit like what
very
Kelly was saying?
boring, exactly.
Boring.
It was
not,
boring.
Not exciting enough.
Yeah, and that was also true of the emotional world, to answer your question. So when difficulties came up, or people complained, or I had problems, I didn't have any patience for it. I would just, kind of get myself out of it as quickly as I could with more, visionary, expansive ideas. But over the years, of course, life happens, and difficulties happen, and I had my share, certainly. And so I've, gotten extremely comfortable with the dark side of things, with the shadows, and learned the enormous value that's there, and the gift of these experiences.
Through life experience, you had to learn to navigate.
Exactly, yeah.
And what about, are you also sensitive to having your freedom limited?
Yeah, very much so. And I run my own business. I like my own hours. I like being able to choose, what days I have free, what weeks I have free. I like to be able to make those decisions on as I go along. I'm very flexible, and I've had my freedom limited in quite a few ways in my life, and I have not liked it at all. But it's been a lot of source of growth for me, and the way it's been a source of growth is probably might be looked at by many people as a fantasy. I just go inward. I go inward into what I feel is my spiritual freedom, and that helps me a tremendous amount.
Yeah, yeah. And I think hearing a theme that spirituality is sort of part of the way to negotiate the difficulty and how that is as a support. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So now maybe starting with Charlotte again, we'd love to hear about, how you've used insights around being a 7 for growth. And also if you want to add anything about your subtype, if you know it.
Yeah. Okay. So my subtype is I'm a self-pres. And one of the things that I didn't mention that I think is really important is career-wise. In 1981, I discovered the Creative Problem Solving Institute in Buffalo, New York, and a friend said you should go out there, explore it. I had been a teacher. I went out there, and it was like I walked into my world because it was all learning the Osborne-Parnes creative problem-solving process we learned, and all about creativity. So it was a week-long workshop in Buffalo with about 1,000 people from around the world there to learn about creativity. And I just went, oh my God, what is this? So I went back home and then got a leave from my teaching job and decided to go into business. It was when I totally changed my career. It was like a springboard of this problem-solving process. I used it as a springboard to launch myself into another career, because what everyone was doing, facilitating this process, I said, that's what I'm going to be doing. I want to do that. So I kind of then planned my career. And this kind of ties back to the self-pres, because a self-pres 7, from what I understand, we're pretty more practical than some of the other 7s. So I think I was very practical in laying out, oh my God, this is what I want to do when I grow up. And here are the steps that I'm going to need to do it. And I actually used the problem-solving process to create a vision for myself and this plan, which I've now incorporated into a process that I call futurescaping that I use with my clients.
Wow, that's so perfect. That makes so much sense.
And it really is it's not rocket science. It sounds like it is. It really isn't. It's just looking at what's working, what's not working, envisioning what you want, and coming up with a plan to get there. Mm-hmm. So I created this futurescaping process. I used it on myself. I went through everything. And that's how I eventually, by 94, got into my own business.
So you kind of reinvented yourself.
I totally did. Yeah, I had to go back and get a degree in business, and I had been in education. And so very practical, and that's my self-pres coming out. I've taken care of myself pretty well. I really have. I've been a single mom and raised my kids. And so the commitment thing, to your point, very committed to the things that I care about. Very, very committed. And follow through. And I think I'm pretty responsible.
Right.
So I know 7s are given a bad rap because of that, but I don't relate to that at all, because I've totally been on my own, all these years and made it work. So,
right. And I like how your story brings together a lot of different things about 7s, which 7s tend to relate to being problem solvers.
Yeah.
And being creative problem solvers, right? Like being able to imagine a lot of different things and play with a lot of different scenarios in their heads and almost enjoy the process of problem solving.
And the reframing, because when I'm working with a client, all of a sudden they're working on this, and I'll see the connection over here with what they could be doing.
Right.
And I'll offer it, and they'll go, yeah. So I think maybe being able to see connections that I might not have seen. And the other thing about the self-pres is the gluttony piece about networking. And when I read that, it was embarrassing to me because I realized how I do that. And when I moved from New England to come out here because my daughter had a baby Charlotte. So I realized, gotta go. So I moved to California to be, closer to my family. And it meant I really had to start my business over again. And I was 65. And so I started networking, and I called it, I had a book, I still have it. It's called The Networking Machine. And every person I met at any breakfast, I had this whole list. I still have this thing. I feel like I need to give it to somebody because I don't want to throw it away. But it's just got everybody I knew, how I met them, so I could, and that's how I developed my business on the West Coast, was this networking machine. But with the gluttony the gluttony about creating the network so that I would feel safe and secure. And that's what I was doing. I was creating all these people in my life that might bring me income,
That
right?
could meet your needs, right, through the network. And
Yeah.
also, self-pres sevens are so good at creating opportunities for themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And we even met we have a mutual friend through a self-pres seven
Yeah.
who did a similar thing and totally reinvented her career.
Right.
And did it really well,
Yeah.
really practically, was really interested in the Enneagram, didn't know much about it, learned about it, and has created this really successful business.
Yeah, she's amazing.
And it's another example, I
Yeah.
think, of what self-preservation sevens can be very good at, like envisioning it, making it happen. How can I network to get the needs
Yeah.
met? And self-preservation sevens are the seven who tend to be a little bit more in touch with fear and anxiety.
Really? Yeah, because
And
I definitely.
And most self-preservation sevens I talk to, they are the ones that are more conscious of it in an ongoing way, where there's other sevens must say they don't really experience it very much at all, or only when they've had like a life circumstance that really brought it up.
Yeah, and that just the development, just to add to,
Yes.
that was part of your question,
Please.
was it's really through meditation. I mean, it's going to the five. So taking a vision quest, going to the desert,
Allowing yourself to go deeper into
go
something,
deep, to go-
especially yourself.
to go deeper into myself has really been key. And nature does it for me. So I, just hikes, walks in nature to be close to God, it's just, get in touch with that spirit within
Is there
me.
a piece about slowing down? Because I know
Totally,
sevens
yeah.
can be very fast-paced.
Yeah.
They think very quickly and they can move. And I once knew a seven and he talked so quickly I could barely keep up with him. But it sounds like that's part of this, is like slowing down and sort of allowing yourself to sink into your own experience
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
And that sounds like what you're describing, and certainly spirituality is
Yeah.
one avenue that
Yeah.
can help that a lot.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Sandy, anything you want to say about your subtype and also what's helped you to grow and develop?
I think I lean towards the self-pres in terms of just taking care of myself. I love it when my refrigerator's filled with food. I always carry my water bottle with me. I, just always, just taking care of that kind of stuff.
Do you relate to being practical as well?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I'm more in touch with my fear and my anxiety. And I don't know if this ties into being more on the sixth wing side. Like, I don't know if you're going to get to this question later, but in terms of the wings, I'm probably lean more on the sixth side. I was relating a lot to the sixth panel, but can definitely tap into the 8 when I see some injustice. But that fear and anxiety, being practical, I've got I've been saving money I'm concerned about security in my retirement. Will I have enough? That kind of thing. Networking, knock on wood, I've been so successful. I've had a lot of jobs, but it's through networking. People who I know, I've had jobs where they created a job for me to come in where there wasn't a job there. So, yeah, that's helped. And I also have some social in me as well.
Yeah.
I've been actively involved with organizations. I guess in reading about here, like with the gluttony, is like the sacrifice of my own time to give back to an organization.
I was
with my
thinking
time.
about that with
Yeah.
you because we've been involved in the same organization. I
Yes.
know you've given a lot of your time.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah. That's,
Okay. And what about growth?
And
What's helped you to grow in light of the 7?
Yeah, something that I continue to try to do, and because I'm so much in my head, is really to drop down and get into my body. Meditate, which is hard to do, but I continue to try, and I will continue to try. Being physical, being outdoors, definitely. Running, being in my body, doing body things like running or riding my bike or just skiing or something outdoors helps a lot. Walking in nature, peace, quiet, music. Those are things that help me to calm down, or rather slow down. I should say not calm, but slow down. And yeah,
Yeah, getting out of your head.
getting out of my head. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's helped you in terms of being more with your feelings or discomfort or anxiety? Is there anything that you've done that's allowed that to become easier over time?
I think stopping and breathing and before reacting, or when I'm feeling a reaction coming up, just kind of trying to get my observer enacted to see that, oh, I'm having a reaction here. How do I really feel? Like
To slow the whole
to
thing
slow
down.
the whole thing down, also touch, get more in touch with my gut and what's my intuition telling me about something. So just trying to pay more attention to that, that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. So, Kelly, I think you said you're 1-to-1 or sexual subtype.
Yeah, 1-to-1. I'm not so much sure about speaking to it. I know that it has a lot to do with just not living in reality so much, and always. Yeah, I have this whiteboard where I have like all these different ideas on it, and they're all ideas in my mind. They're all multi-million-dollar businesses. But the thing is, I'll start one of them, or I'll start talking about one, and then like a month or two later, I'm like that. There's something else that comes up that's more exciting, and then I'll have another idea for a business, and then, and then I'll want someone to come along with me and help me with the business because I have too many ideas, and I need somebody who's a little bit stronger at business to kind of help me put it together. And I'm not so much the sexual part. I'm not so much how to speak to it so much.
Yeah. And then I think for me, the subtype is often even more important, although the sexual piece can be part of it. But I think part of it is there's almost like a drive to see things as in a super positive way, like kind of like what you're already saying, And I've also heard that, like, for instance, when people work with other people, they can see what the positive for them even more than the person themselves can see it for them. So being able to envision positive possibilities for other people as well as yourself.
Yeah. And that's true too. I had a client who, for about a year, who was in a wheelchair, and she was limited. She had a stroke, and it was a really cool situation for me because I got to take her out and do whatever I thought was fun. And so where she thought she might be limited in this, and like she couldn't really stand, but she loved to play golf. So I remember taking her to a golf course one day and just trying to give her a little bit of confidence. We went to play putt-putt golf. And so whatever she thought might be a limitation, I would help her to see that perhaps it wasn't a limitation for her. And that was just a really exciting part for me with her. And then also I relate a little bit with the social part too, because I've done a lot of different volunteer work and volunteered with different organizations and given so much of my time. And in an ideal world, that's what I would do. I would start philanthropic organizations and do volunteer work for the rest of my life because I love that so much and giving back. And it takes a lot of time to do that. So, yeah.
And so how have you used these insights about being a 7 to grow on your, in terms of your own development?
Yeah, one of the guys in my Enneagram class that I go to, he's a 5, and the other day I texted him and I said, I would love to spend a day in the life of you. And he was like, what? And
It's a good idea.
Yeah. And so I wanted just to hang out with him for a day to see like what his quiet world was like, which I've learned is not so quiet.
We heard that from the 5, especially on the inside.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, it's just actually learning. It's going to a 7-night silent retreat and getting really quiet. And I really love to talk. And I told some friends that I was going to go do that. And they were like, what? You're going to go be quiet for a week? But really, it's getting into those quiet spaces and getting into myself. And like you were saying, more into my body and recognizing when stress is coming in and where it's hitting me and where I'm feeling it in my body, to be able to really breathe into it and to get calm and quiet. And nature is a great place. And meditation, I've done meditation on and off. You know, when I do it for a month straight, I feel totally different. And then the next month, there'll be way too many events to meditate. So then I'll have to get back into it again. I'll have to keep bringing myself back to this quiet place. And I know that that's where my growth is. And that's where the learning is for me, is in the quiet spaces out in nature and just learning to still the mind and feel into the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That's well put. I know that it's funny, sometimes when people learn the Enneagram and they learn about the 7, it's like the type people want to be, like, I want to be a 7. Mm-hmm. They're having all the fun. But I know that part of what 7s sometimes say is that it's also one of the downsides can be having a difficult conversation or having a conflict with someone. Can you speak to maybe how that's been for you? When you get into the tough stuff in relationship, how do you experience that, and what have you done around that?
Well, since I'm dating a 9, and neither one of us like conflict too much, and I don't mind bringing it up. I don't mind bringing up a topic or something that's challenging, but actually, like, following through and getting into the depth of conversation. Sometimes I find myself like, well, I want to pull more things out of him for sure, and then yet I think that I'm this very vulnerable person and that I can open up and share really everything that's going on inside of me. But I've learned that that's learning for me too. Mm-hmm. So it's not been that easy to deal with conflict, and also like in areas of like friendships. You know, I have a specific friend that I'm thinking of who she'll challenge me, or she'll judge me for something because I'm too excited about something, or I'm too this, or I'm not focused enough, or whatever. And what I do oftentimes is I shut down, and I'll just shut down and just retreat and just like pretend that it's going to go away. So then that way I don't have to talk about it. I don't have to face it. And then eventually it will come up, and we'll kind of sometimes it's tiptoeing around things. I notice that I do that, and not being completely direct in a conflict.
Mm-hmm. And I know that 7s, I've heard from 7s that they can actually be more self-critical than we think they are. Like, because they always look like they're okay, we think that they're not beating themselves up. But I think is it true that 7s can really be very self-critical and they can take criticism to heart?
Totally. Yeah. I notice that I can react to criticism like really quickly, and I have to stop myself and take a breath and actually pause before I'm going to respond to something when I feel like I am being criticized. And oftentimes I remember even growing up, like my parents would say something to me and I'd get upset or I'd be angry, and they would say, we're just talking to you. We're not criticizing you. We're not telling you that anything is wrong or that you're bad or that you're this. But I was so sensitive that I would oftentimes take things that way. And I beat myself up a lot. It's funny because I didn't really realize it until this current relationship that I'm in now, how much I beat myself up and how not gentle with myself I am, and how I'm always, it's like I'm this internal perfectionist, but it's never perfect enough. And it will never be perfect enough. So I can keep trying and keep doing, but it's like the doing isn't going to get it more perfect. The actually stopping and slowing down is going to make it so it's a little bit easier.
Right. Really well said.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Very much the sense of of the ideal is so beautiful of how a person might be, how I might be, how I should be, and I think that after all of this work and all these years of trying to be, that I get hugely disappointed when I get sometimes feedback that tells me that I'm not there, and so sometimes it really hits deeply and might take a day or two or three or a week or two or three to
Wow.
get through. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. And so you've touched on this a little bit about what you've done to grow, but what other things do you think in terms of this path, in terms of being very positive and expansive, but also having to learn to deal with some of the difficulties? What lessons have you learned, or how have you coped with that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, did you want me to talk about subtype as well?
Oh,
or-
sure. Yeah, yeah. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I missed that. Yes,
That's
please
okay.
do.
Sure. So I think you got the idea that I'm pretty much the one-on-one sexual subtype for sure. And that was certainly very true when I was younger. I could relate a great deal to what you all said about having an idea, visioning it out really clearly, making it happen, seeing what needed to happen, putting out the energy, making it happen. I've created like 3 careers, that were all unusual and unique, that I just sort of created out of thin air and made them all work. So I feel like I have that what's it called?
Self-preservation?
Self-preservation,
Yeah.
quality
You've got
as
that in
well,
there.
very strongly.
Yeah.
On the social side, there's elements. I've been involved in organizations. I tend to be very committed. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary a couple of weeks from now, and I've been very strongly committed to my own projects, to organizations I've been involved in. So. Yeah, just to put a little more weight on your in favor of 7s, that
Yes.
they're not flakes.
I agree. Yes. Yes.
So, in terms of balance, for me, the need was to just be grounded. I tended, as I said earlier, to discount so much the ordinary, the mundane parts of life, the things that need to be done to just move forward, and not only move forward, but to build solidly. I didn't have much of a concept of that when I was young. So these last 12 years, I've been running a landscaping business, which is pretty grounded.
Yes.
And I have 4, sometimes 5 employees, and who need to be scheduled and directed. And I have 40 clients that need to be taken care of with great detail, because you never hear about all the good things that you do. You hear about the things that don't get done, or the things that weren't done right. I have to be hugely detail oriented. None of that came naturally to me, and so I'm learning to discipline myself to take joy in these mundane things was very, very important. So that's been a really good balance for my imaginative, flighty, expansive 7 kind of qualities. Yeah.
Right, balancing that out by getting more focused, getting more grounded, doing it. Yeah, it's sometimes said that 7s love the idea stage, but implementing their plans is harder.
Oh, yeah, it's excruciating to have to go through all that, especially the billing.
Yeah, it's so funny. One time I did a panel of 7s, and they all agreed in the biggest to the highest degree that they all disliked paperwork.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So billing. Yeah.
Yeah. And also I want to say that, I've come to I've really come to honor deeply the ordinary and ordinary people. And that's been a real liberation for me. Yeah.
Are you okay being bored now?
It's impossible to be bored. Everything's beautiful. Everything's beautiful. My sister said about me, she gets very irritated because she's rather rational and scientific, and she says, rolling her eyes, she says, "I have an epiphanous brother."
Epiphanous. Oh, that's great. What a great word. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to control myself because for the first
Epiphanous.
the first 3 or 4 decades of my life, I believed that the way I was the way everybody should be. And I was dedicated to helping everybody see the glory of everything and the beauty of everything and, the wonder of everything. And then I learned slowly that people got a little irritated by that. Yeah.
That's great. Anything else you want to say about the growth process, or, anything about any of that?
And I don't know. In terms of, I guess I touched on it earlier. In terms of dealing with difficulties and negative emotions, and other people's negative emotions, and hard conversations, I feel like I avoided that a lot in earlier years, and now I really honor that and have gotten quite good at it. Yeah.
How did you learn to get better at it?
Well, being forced to face my own negative sides, my shadows, which I tried, really to avoid. I tried every possible way to avoid those shadows for years, and then being forced up against them really forced me to look and to work and to drop down, and so then I got into the work. Actually, I mean, I've been involved with an organization called the Mankind Project now for years that works a great deal with shadow and helping men to understand and work with their shadows in a positive way, in the
Yep,
interest
I've heard
of
of it.
avoiding violence and depression and everything else that goes along with
That's
it.
great work.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good. Okay, so I want to just say a little bit. You can hold on to that because I've got this. A little bit about the arrow movements, because I think they're especially interesting with 7. We touched on it a little bit. Charlotte mentioned 5, but so 7s, they're going against the arrow. They go to 5, and 5 is a place where they can, exactly like they've been saying, I think in many different beautiful ways, go inside, go deeper into their own experience, sink into areas of knowledge or area of work that they may be working in. Sometimes 7s that relate to the phrase jack of all trades, master of none. So here they get more deeply into developing more expertise in their skill in a deeper way, knowing more, being more internal, quieter, slowing down, going, like when they talked about going into nature, I think all of these might be going into a 5 space, coming out of the world and more deeply into themselves, and thinking more deeply about things. And then that gives them more grounding inside themselves to make the more difficult trip to 1. 1 is sometimes called the stress point, but I think it's actually the point of spiritual growth as well. And of course, spiritual growth is stressful. So it makes sense that that's harder or more challenging. But 7s, when they go to 1, it's a little bit, it's like, well, what they've been talking about already really clearly, which is needing to get more grounded in the body, learning to implement their idealistic ideas and the possibilities they envision in reality, learning what are the steps that are needed to take to get more grounded and more practical. 1s are very good at creating processes and making things happen through a step-by-step routine or rule-bound way. And so it helps 7s learn to be more self-disciplined, learning to bring their visions into reality in a more grounded way, and learning to be more in their body. And more to exactly like Garth was just saying, balancing out the ability to be very mental and envision and imagine in such beautiful big ways, but then learning to balance that out by being more in the body and more in the world and more in the step-by-step process of implementing things or making things happen in that way.
I've been building business systems for the last 2 or 3 years. Anathema to a 7.
So
to me, at least.
So that's been an achievement that you've been doing lately that wouldn't have come so naturally to you. Exactly. And I think that 1 stuff is stuff that doesn't come so naturally to 7s. It can feel more tedious and boring and not as fun. And yet, when they're able to really do that, it's a really nice way to balance out what they tend to be so good at in terms of innovative thinking and positive visions. Yes, please. Yeah. Add something.
So I just wanted to add a dark side of the 7 going to the 1.
Oh, please.
And that is, so when I'm really stressed out, like I notice it if I'm putting on some big training program or workshop, and I get there anally early and I'm totally in a 1 mode. I mean, I am making sure every I is dotted, every T. People who work with me, just think I'm a different, if they don't know Enneagram, and the Enneagram, they think of Myers-Briggs. They think that I'm like, just STJ, because I am. I just turn into this crazy lady and just making sure everything is perfect, And then and it's funny because if I work with somebody who's like that, then I can relax and be my 7 self and have fun.
Ah, interesting.
So it's really better
Yes.
if I work with somebody who's opposite from me,
Yes.
who takes that role. And I remember that I worked with this one fellow who was very STJ, and he was ESTJ, and he always had his watch on. He was just anal about the time, and it was so great working with him because I could throw my watch off and like relax and laugh and have fun. Otherwise, I would have taken that role.
Ah, interesting.
So I really
Yes.
notice that when I'm stressed,
Yes.
how really crazy I get, and I have to breathe and try to go to the 5 and meditate and do all these things to come back to
Yeah, so
my
you remind
seventh
us
self.
that we can slide to both airline points in an unconscious way,
Yeah.
and where we often act out sort of the lower tendencies of
Yeah.
that type, and so that's one way that the arrows make sense, is that they're places almost like release valves where we
Yeah.
can go under certain circumstances. And it's a great example of 7 going to 1 under those circumstances. But then there are also developmental opportunities, so we can also use them as ways to balance ourselves out in a bigger way, to be more than just our personality.
Yeah. And to be successful with my business, I'd
Yes.
use the good parts of the one.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Which again, if you know 7 and 1 at this point, you can see how they're really good balancing points. Similar when 1s go to 7, it's really freeing for them to be able to have more fun and be lighter and more relaxed and just go with the flow and be spontaneous.
Yeah.
The way healthy 7s are.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Anyone else want to comment to those? Make a comment around those movements to 5 and 1.
Yeah, very, very similar. When I'm stressed at work, the highs and the lows of being in 1, the not so positive part is I get extremely critical and judgmental. And of myself, we touched on this earlier about 7s being self-criticizing, and I
Right.
can beat myself up like crazy, but other people too, and very rigid.
Yeah.
So that's the not pretty side. But the positive side is that with that monkey mind, it helps to get me grounded. It helps to, so I work with a lot of paper. I do contracts. I'm a contracts negotiator. So, and I've got a lot of projects. So it helps me to get focused. I can get into my projects or my contracts and really be productive, be much more productive. So, and be, with my mind and be spot on with.
Kind of blend the sort of sharp mind with the
Right.
sort of more sort of discipline around
Exactly.
getting things done and doing
Exactly.
something in a particular way.
Yeah. So that's, so I appreciate that part of the 1. And then with the 5, yeah, exactly that. It's locking myself up in my house. Just, I can get lost in my house and away from the outside world, away from all the social activities, allows me to go in and to just be with me. And it's funny, one time I was going through a period of where a really, what's that word? Thinking about things. Can't think of the word.
Reflective?
Retrospective. Thank you. Yeah, a
Retrospective.
retrospective period. And I was talking to a friend on the phone, and he said to me something like, "You're being really stingy." And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting for the 5 with avarice of my time and not wanting to do all this? But it didn't bother me because it felt like what I needed to
Yeah,
be
it
doing.
might have been more of a balancing out
Yeah.
of being too much out there,
Right.
giving too much.
Right. Right. So that's been my experience.
Okay.
Mine's very similar. Not a whole lot to add, but definitely very critical and judgmental under stress, especially with people close to me, and just lashing out. And now I catch myself more when I'm doing it and try to take a step back, but it's still like it's like the jury's already heard the information, so you can't really take it back. And I had a boyfriend say that to me one time. I said something to him. I said, "Never mind." He goes, "You can't take it back. You've already said it. The jury's already." I was like, "Okay, sorry."
You can't unsay
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah, very, very critical, and thinking that everybody should do things the way that I would do them, and thinking that everyone thinks the same way that I do, and then when they don't, it's like I'm surprised and shocked, and the reality of it is Like, it's really great that we all don't think alike. Yeah. And then for the 5 side, for me, it's really learning how to say no. I mean, last night there were lots of different things I could do. I had a few different invites, and I said, I'm going to actually take a bath and read an Enneagram book. So it was like, that was just little things like that. Just the saying the no when I've for so many years been yes to everything and fit so many things in a day that the average person would go, how could you even possibly do that? And now I realize the value in the no's and saying no and slowing down. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. Thanks. Anything you want to add, or you kind of already spoke to that?
No, I'll just emphasize the same thing about the no. Just the last couple of years, beginning to realize how wonderful it is to just go into my own space and not have to respond to everything and everybody all the time.
Yeah. Because everyone sees us as this we're fun beings of light, and we always have we know where the party is, and we know where the gatherings are, and we know where, and even though we do, we forget that sometimes not going to that party is actually a really good thing.
Fiving out inside the house can be a good balancing point for you. Yeah.
Fiving out.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Michael, is there any comment or question you had for the panel?
Well, first of all, I just think all the panels today have been extraordinary, but listening to the 6s and the 7s has been amazing. And I appreciate 7s a lot. I learned some things today. I didn't know 7s were so sensitive to criticism. I didn't know that you struggled with that. And the other thing I've just been learning, I'm more aware of today, is how real the growth trajectories are for all of us. That we start with these patterns, and then just listening to you all talk about how you've grown is very powerful. So I think what I'm sensing right now, which goes into the question period that we'll have and then the final time with Beatrice, is just the growth that is taking place in me by the experience of these 3 days together and listening to all of these things. I think partly because I am so comfortable with being a social/sexual 5 and enjoying the space so much. And then I listen to the types that struggle more with growth, and I think to myself, somehow your struggles inspire me to go beyond my comfort and more consciously explore where the growth trajectories are for me, something like that. But I just have a deep sense of how extraordinary these 3 days of panels have been, both in deepening my sense of Enneagram, but also just in our individual and collective movement. It just feels to me like there's something going on here. I mean, Commonweal's a place, given that Arlene Alsman and Arlene is here, have done 200, would you raise your hand, Arlene? Arlene coordinates the Cancer Help Program, and so we've done 205 week-long retreats, and those retreats tend to be extremely powerful and transformational. So this is a place where these kinds of experiences happen. And I just experience in some quiet way that happening with the community of us that have gone through this, that there's movement taking place in us as a result of doing this together. I mean, one of our friends, Francis Weller, has a great line, I forget who he takes it from, but he says this work is the solitary journey that you cannot do alone. This is the solitary work that you cannot do alone. And I feel that about what's happening here, that this is the solitary work, but we can't do it alone. And when we create this kind of energetic body, it intensifies our collective ability to do the solitary work by coming together to do it. So,
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Who said that?
Excuse me? Well, Francis Weller, who co-leads the Cancer Help Program, is the person who uses the quote. Arlene, but he borrowed it from someone. If it comes to me, I'll let you know. But
And it fits with the Enneagram because Gurdjieff said, alone one man can do nothing. Like we need to do this by definition in groups and collectively. It's collective work. Yeah. So questions for the sevens? Yes.
I have a question for you. I'm kind of new to Enneagram, and I'm trying to understand the arrow system. And as I'm looking at the patterns, I notice like all of the body types, they have arrows going to both the heart and the head. And in most systems of growth I've heard about, you sort of integrate the mind, the body, the heart. But with the heart and the head types, two of them don't integrate to the other side. They integrate to the body and again to the head, or they integrate to the heart or again to the body.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there's any significance to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true that all of us need to incorporate body, mind, and spirit, and we all need to get into all three centers. I think that's just sort of a basic idea behind the Enneagram. But I do think there are specific types that the arrow lines are more about balancing and antidotes. And sometimes it's said that, for instance, four goes to 2 and 1. And so sometimes it's said that 4's head type is actually 7 because there's an invisible line between 4 and 7, but you can also think about it as 4 is going to 1 and then 7. But I'm not exactly sure all the why behind it, but I know that first and foremost, those are balancing points. But yes, and at the same time, we all need to integrate all three centers. And apparently there was a comment beneath one of the videos that they posted that someone was saying I'm a 5 and not a 2. And I took that as a big compliment because I think I am pretty mental for a 2, so I think there are also hidden ways that these things show up. But I'm not exactly sure of a complete answer for your definition, but that observation is on point for sure. That not every type goes to sort of a head type to other centers. Yeah. Other questions for sevens? Yeah.
Well, we had 2 people who talked about physical injuries or physical impairments recently. And I'm curious how that, when you're in a sense brought down physically and you can't be out there, I don't know, I'm just curious about that experience. Is that experience different for a 7 than it is for somebody else?
Anything either of you want to say about sort of being physically limited given the difficulty with limitation? Yeah, Charlotte.
So I actually had a couple sort of different experiences with this because one is I suddenly got Guillain-Barré, which was very, very serious, where all of a sudden I started getting paralyzed on the legs.
Wow.
Yeah, it came on very suddenly. Fortunately, within 3 months, I was a miracle person that just was healed from it. But I was in such denial the week that I was getting it. I'm telling you, it was really weird. And I remember my sister researching because I started having these symptoms, and she was saying, I think you have Guillain-Barré. And I wrote back, there is no way I have that.
Wow.
Like I just got this strong, 8 energy, like, are you kidding me? No way would I have that. Total denial. And then, when they took me to intensive care and he said, I'm admitting you, I said, no, are you kidding me? It was so, when I look back on it, I was in complete denial, almost the whole first part of it. People say, you're really sick. And no way. I'm sorry, I don't do serious sickness. Maybe a knee surgery or something, but no, I don't do serious. So that was interesting, and I realized in retrospect that was my 7, like just trying to protect me from how scary it was. Like I look back now and get scared. But so that was one thing. But then to Kathleen's question, I mean, we're friends, so she knows that I've been struggling with. I am so active with biking and being out in nature, and I've been going crazy with just being in the house, and there's only so much reading I want to do, and I'm not one to watch TV. So I've been begging people to come over and visit me. Come over and visit me because.
Where do you live?
You've got to take her.
Yeah, really. No, I have. And then I was able to drive after 2 weeks, and I got really excited. I thought, oh, I can drive. But then I realized, no, you're all dressed up. You have nowhere to go. You can't do anything. So, I can't go hiking. I can go for a drive. I can go to Trader Joe's, but so yeah.
So it's not easy, it sounds like.
No, it's just it's
Yes.
been frustrating. So
I'll just share one thing. I was training for a triathlon, and I tripped and fell and broke my finger and had to have surgery. And I had this big thing I had to wear, and I couldn't do the triathlon. I couldn't do my training. And so for 2 months, I just went into this depression. Now, it was a depression for me because I wasn't getting that adrenaline that I was getting from all the exercise that I had been doing. I couldn't go and do all the things. I mean, just in every way, I just was depressed for 2 months.
Yeah, that can happen. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We'll just pass it along the line because I think we all have a story, right? Yeah, I totally can relate to both of you guys with not being grounded at home. And I don't know your question about is it different than other types, the pain. That's a good question. I don't know.
I think that denial may be one piece of it, or that it's a big deal, that it really is hard to be limited in that physical way. And so I think denial and depression, I think it makes sense, in terms of it's really hard as a 7 to experience something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I know even with my own back pain, after that, like going around and around with the insurance company, and they finally denied my MRI, and at that point I was still not mobile, and I said, you know what, I'm taking my health into my own hands, forget about it. And so I started doing tons of research, and I was like, okay. So, and then I started looking at the worst possible scenarios. I was like, okay, if I have herniated discs, then I'm gonna have to have surgery, and oh my God, but I realized that I needed to get moving. Even if I didn't feel like I could move, I needed to try and move. And the more I took my health into my own hands, and it was just great. And probably the best thing that happened to me during the whole being down was I have a friend that's really into Enneagram. And since I was pretty new at it, and she left 10 Enneagram books on her doorstep for me. So I just got to read and read and read and read until I couldn't read anymore. But the depression is real. Like it's really real when you're used to being super active and super busy, and to be down like that, it's like, yeah. And you wonder if it's going to end. And when it does, and it starts to subside, like you had the freedom to drive, and like, it's like, right? It's like, it's wonderful. Yeah, I get it. Totally get it.
One thing I haven't sort of fully heard said about 7s, I have a friend who's a very evolved spiritual 7, and he is so positive about everyone and everything, and it doesn't come across as fake in any way. It's just like this deep spiritual sense, the beautiful quote, and all will be well, and all manner of things will be well. And what was coming up for me when some of you were talking about denial is that psychologically, denial gets a lot of bad press, which isn't necessarily deserved. That denial in illness or in difficult situations can actually be a tremendously positive force. And if you just think about, Garth was talking about, I think it was Garth talking about teaching, somebody was talking about teaching imagery. There are all, it can be done badly. It can be turned into just sort of a new age stereotype of positive thinking will get you there. But it's also true that done well, that positive thinking and imagery and denial and all these ways of can in fact be profoundly beneficial. So it just seems to me that one of the the truest high sides of 7 is that it is a guide to that spiritual reality, physical reality, social and emotional reality, that bringing this affirmation into the world can move the arc in the right direction.
I had about a year and a half ago, I had a really horrendous shoulder accident plunging over an embankment on my bicycle and just tore it all up. And so it took a year and a half to get better. At first, I thought, okay, I've never had anything like this before. How am I going to respond to this? And I thought, well, I guess I just better decide that I'm old now. This is my rite of passage into my later years, and I won't ride my bike anymore, and I'll just be more studious and take the quiet time I've been wanting and so on. But something in me, my 7 nature, that adventurous nature, people said, are you driving? I said, of course I'm driving. And the whole 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock on the driving, I've never done that, I drive with my knees. It doesn't matter if one arm's gone. I could drive with both arms gone. And so I was driving right away. And then I went, like 2 weeks after the accident, I was at a Mankind Project weekend, and they gave me, supervising the cleanup as one of my duties, and I couldn't stand everybody else working, so I was like mopping with one hand, while the other arm was in a sling. And so there's this force inside of me, perhaps as a 7, that is, that's just so life affirming and adventurous and wanting to do. So then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to get back on my bicycle, but I won't ride on the trails anymore. I'll just ride on the safe fire roads. I couldn't. I was back on the very same trail that I injured myself on, I'm almost like the 3rd ride I was back on that trail, but just a little more carefully this time. So there's something, there's this force.
Irrepressible.
Yeah, irrepressible
Yes,
force. Yeah.
yes. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
As I understand it, 7s need a lot of room in a relationship to do their own thing and spread their wings. And I'm just wondering, for those of us who are in close relationship with 7s, how can we give you the space to spread your wings without sort of sacrificing our desire to have closeness with you? To manage both.
Good question. How can we be in a relationship with you and give you space, but at the same time, have a good relationship and be in contact?
I would say the big part is communication, like being in communication with us, letting us know what your needs are, so that because we want to honor your needs, and we also want to honor our own needs for space. But if you let us know, I have this desire to be close to you, how are you feeling about it? And let us be a part of the process. I think for me, that would be really helpful. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I'll say something. I think entering into the adventurous spirit is really important. I'm in a relationship with a 6, and so almost anything I suggest, the immediate answer is no. It doesn't tend towards cultivating a lot of what you want. So being able to enter into the adventurous spirit and go along with that is really helpful.
Being positive.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to? Okay. They want to say something about your successful 13-year relationship?
I think because we met later in life, so we're both very independent. So he gives me a lot of space. I give him a lot of space. We often take separate trips. Not necessarily, usually family oriented. We'll do vacations together, and I think we both really relish in having that time alone or to ourselves. And we give that to each other. It's not a problem. And so that's worked very well for us. In terms of friendships, I'm not sure if you're talking about romantic or just in general friends.
Both. Yeah, friends.
Yeah, close relationships. Communication, yes, is key. Adventure, I kind of agree. Something adventurous. For me, if it's too sticky, that can be an issue for me if I feel they're too needy or too sticky. So
Sticky being kind of the person's needing things of you and
Glomming on.
yeah.
glomming on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, At first I want to say, give us, if you make a date or something to give time, but I also like spontaneity. I like, hey, can you meet for breakfast this morning? Sometimes that's the best thing because I don't have a plan and I'm free and that sounds great. So, yeah.
I think just what I would add is just about constant negativity. I mean, that's something, whether it be like putting out an offer and having the person constantly saying, I don't think so. I'm cleaning my sock drawer today, after a while, it's like, so people, I mean, in my relationships, it's people who say yes, people who say yes to an offer, people who offer back. So the reciprocity, and the positivity. I mean, and I could relate with having friends call, and I will spend time helping problem solve. And I love that. I love being, and I think closeness, I don't know about closeness is really important to me. I mean, intimacy in my friendships are just something I so highly value. So it's not about that kind of space. It's more about, don't fence me in with your negativity or saying no to the offers, that kind of thing. That's infringing upon my space. Yeah, but it's not the closeness or the caring. Yeah.
You like closeness?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Looks like we might be finished. Okay. Thank you very much, Sevens.